The courtroom of Judge Beatrice Hargrove was her kingdom. She was judge, jury, and often executioner, especially for those she deemed unfit. When Malik Thompson, a black man in a slightly rumpled suit, stood before her for a simple traffic warrant, she saw only what her prejudice allowed: another criminal. She decided to make an example of him. She refused to listen. She sentenced him to 48 hours in jail for contempt. But what Judge Hargrove didn't know was that the man she was trying to imprison was not just an innocent citizen. He was the most powerful lawyer in the city and her new boss. Courtroom 3B of the Kings County Courthouse was not just a room. It was a monument to Judge Beatrice Hargrove. The oak walls, darkened by a century of grim pronouncements, were scrubbed and polished weekly. The brass railing separating the gallery from the bar gleamed under the cold fluorescent lights. Even the air felt curated, heavy with the scent of old paper, floor wax, and the metallic tang of absolute, unquestionable authority. And at the center of this universe, perched high on her judicial throne, sat Judge Hargrove. In her late 60s, Hargrove was a woman forged from old money and brittle ideology. Her silver hair was perpetually locked in a severe bun, and her robes, always impeccably starched, seemed more like armor than attire. In the courthouse hallways, she was known as Beatrice the Merciless, a nickname spoken only in whispers. She believed in order, in breeding, and in the cleansing power of swift, merciless judgment. Her grandfather, Judge Theodore Hargrove, had presided over this same bench, and Beatrice saw herself as the righteous heir to a legacy of stamping out the element that she believed was perpetually eroding society. Her morning docket was, in her eyes, a parade of human failings: drunk drivers, petty thieves, sobbing mothers, and defiant young men. She viewed them all with the same icy disdain. Next case, she droned, not looking up from her papers. Docket 88B, the People versus Thompson, her bailiff, a burly, long-suffering man named Harlan Brooks, announced. "Counsel!" Hargrove's voice snapped like a whip. A young woman with tired eyes and a polyester suit stood up. "Rachel Levin, Your Honor, from the Public Defender's Office. My client is here on a bench warrant for a failure to appear on a traffic violation." A failure to appear. Wonderful. Hargrove finally looked up, her gaze scanning the courtroom. "Well, where is he?" "Don't tell me he's failed to appear for his failure to appear. The audacity is almost impressive." "He is here, Your Honor." "He was detained at the security checkpoint," Levin said, her voice tight. "Detained at security. Figures." The side door opened, and Deputy Brooks led a man to the defendant's table. He was a tall black man, athletic in build. He wore a dark gray suit, expensive but disheveled, as if he had been sleeping in it. His tie was loosened at the collar. He looked focused, his expression a mask of controlled frustration. This was Malik Thompson. Judge Hargrove stared at him. She didn't just look, she inspected. Her eyes took in his dark skin, his short, neat dreadlocks, his rumpled suit. Her lip curled, an almost microscopic movement, but one that Rachel Levin, Harlan Brooks, and everyone in the gallery recognized instantly. It was the look, the "here we go" look. Hargrove's internal monologue began, a venomous whisper that fueled her judicial persona. "Look at this. The arrogance, strutting in here in a $5,000 suit he probably bought with stolen money, thinking he's above the law. He can't even be bothered to show up for a simple ticket. This is the rot. This is the disrespect I fight every single day." "So," Hargrove said, her voice dripping with condescension, "you are Mr. Thompson." Malik Thompson stood tall. Yes, Your Honor. There seems to be a significant misunderstanding regarding silence. The word cut through the air. It wasn't a request. It was a command that echoed off the high ceilings. You do not speak in my courtroom unless I give you permission to speak, Hargrove spat. You are a defendant. You have a lawyer. She will speak for you. And frankly, given your failure to appear, your credibility is already zero. Miss Levin, what possible excuse does your client have for wasting this court's time? Rachel Levin gripped her lectern. Your Honor, Mr. Thompson was not properly served. The original summons was sent to an address he hasn't lived at in over 3 years. The ticket itself was for a vehicle he sold years ago. He was here this morning of his own free will to clear up this clerical error when the outstanding warrant, which he was unaware of, was flagged at security. Hargrove let out a sound that was almost a laugh. A clerical error. How convenient. The old, "it wasn't me" defense. I've heard it 1,000 times. Your Honor, I have the bill of sale right here, Levin insisted, waving a paper. Hargrove waved her hand dismissively, not even glancing at the document. I don't care about your paperwork. I care about the fact that a warrant was issued and it was ignored. It shows a fundamental lack of respect for the law. Your Honor, that is demonstrably false, Malik said, his voice low and firm. He couldn't help himself. Hargrove's eyes flashed with genuine fury. Did I give you permission to speak, Mr. Thompson? Did I? Or are you, as I suspect, one of those men who believes his own voice is more important than the rules of this institution? Beatrice. No, Harlan Brooks whispered under his breath from his desk, so quietly no one could hear. He had been staring at the man. He recognized him from the newspaper, but his brain couldn't make the connection fast enough. He had tried to get the judge's attention before the man was brought out, but she had been in one of her moods. Your Honor, Malik tried again. I am an officer of the court. I was just trying to. This was the final straw for Hargrove, the insolence. You are not an officer of the court, she thundered, slamming her hand on her desk. You are a defendant in my courtroom. How dare you impersonate a lawyer? That is a criminal offense in itself. Miss Levin, control your client, or I will hold you both in contempt. Rachel Levin looked at Malik, her eyes wide with panic. She had no idea what he was talking about, but she knew he had just sealed his fate. Judge, please, Levin begged. My client simply meant. I know what he meant, Hargrove said, her face a mask of cold rage. He meant to lie. He meant to intimidate. He meant to play games. And I do not play games. She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto Malik. I see you, Mr. Thompson. I see you clearer than you think. You believe you can swagger in here, disrespect my authority, and walk out. You are mistaken. A suffocating silence fell over courtroom 3B. The only sound was the frantic scratching of a pen from the press row, where a young reporter named Theo Randall was scribbling notes so fast his knuckles were white. He couldn't believe what he was witnessing. Malik Thompson took a slow, deep breath. He held his hands loosely at his sides. He had faced down murderers in interrogation rooms. He had argued before the Supreme Court. He had never in his entire professional life been treated with such naked, unprocessed contempt. His anger was a cold, hard stone in his stomach, but he knew that showing it would be like throwing gasoline on a fire. Your Honor, he said, his voice devoid of all emotion, if you would just look at the file, or allow me to present my identification, the warrant is for a Malik L. Thompson. My name is Malik James Thompson. The date of birth is incorrect. He's trying to play lawyer again, Miss Levin. Hargrove's voice was triumphant. She saw this as a confession, a pathetic attempt to wriggle free on a technicality, arguing about middle initials, the desperation. "I am not interested in your games, sir." "This isn't a game, Your Honor," Rachel Levin pleaded, her voice cracking. "This is a simple case of mistaken identity. He's not even the right person." "Judge, please just read the file." "I have read enough," Hargrove declared. She snapped the file shut. "What I have before me is a man who has shown zero respect for this court. He failed to appear. He was detained at security, likely causing a disturbance. He has interrupted me, a sitting judge, twice, and he has falsely claimed to be an officer of the court. He is, in short, in contempt." "Your Honor, no!" Levin cried out. "Be silent, Miss Levin, or you will be next." Hargrove pointed a long, bony finger at Malik. "Mr. Thompson, I find your behavior insulting. I find your presence an affront to the dignity of this institution. You need to learn a lesson about respect. You need to understand that the law is not something you can just talk your way out of." She relished this moment. This was why she was here, to bring the arrogant crashing down to earth. "I am finding you in summary contempt of court," she announced. "And for the original warrant, I am setting bail at $5,000. $5,000, Levin gasped. "For a parking ticket." "But that," Hargrove continued, a small, cruel smile playing on her lips, "can wait. The contempt charge must be served first. I sentence you, Malik Thompson, to 48 hours in the Kings County Jail, effective immediately." The gallery erupted in gasps. Theo Randall, the reporter, nearly dropped his phone. 48 hours for this. "Your Honor, this is unconscionable," Levin yelled, abandoning all pretense of decorum. "You cannot do this. It is a gross abuse of power." "Deputy Brooks," Hargrove roared, pointing at Levin. "Escort Miss Levin from my courtroom. She is in contempt as well. Hold her in the back." "And deputy," Hargrove added, her voice dropping to a near whisper as she stared at Malik. "Take this defendant into custody. I want him processed. I want him in a cell before lunch." Harlan Brooks rose from his chair. His face was pale. He had been a bailiff for years. He had seen Hargrove be cruel, but this was a new level. He knew instinctively that something was terribly wrong. He had seen the name Thompson on the internal memo that morning, the one about the new DA, but the memo had said M.J. Thompson. This defendant was Malik Thompson. He hadn't put it together, and now he was being ordered to jail him. "Your Honor," Brooks said, his voice trembling slightly. Perhaps we should take a 5-minute recess just to review the file one more time." Hargrove's eyes narrowed to slits. "Are you questioning my order, Deputy?" "No, Your Honor. It's just, I think there might be—" "I gave you a direct order. Arrest that man." Brooks swallowed. He put his hand on his service weapon, a reflexive habit, and unclipped the strap on his holster. He looked at Malik Thompson, who was just watching him, not with fear, not with anger, with pity. Brooks took one step toward the defendant's table, and at that exact moment, the main doors of Courtroom 3B at the far end of the gallery burst open with a crash that shook the very walls. In Judge Hargrove's courtroom, no one entered without permission. No one ran. No one shouted. The crashing of the main doors was such a profound violation of her world that for a second she was too stunned to even be angry. All heads snapped to the back. Standing in the doorway, flanked by 2 stone-faced courthouse marshals, was a man who commanded authority in a way Hargrove only pretended to. He was Judge Reginald Caldwell, the presiding judge of the Kings County Superior Court. Caldwell was a tall, broad-shouldered man in his 70s, a former Marine whose judicial temperament was famously patient, but whose wrath was legendary. He was, in effect, the only person in the building who was Beatrice Hargrove's boss. His eyes scanned the room, his face a mask of thunder. The gallery, which had been murmuring, went dead silent. "Judge Caldwell," Hargrove sputtered, rising from her chair. "What is the meaning of this?" "I am in the middle of a sentencing. This is my courtroom." Judge Caldwell ignored her completely. His gaze was fixed on the scene at the front. Rachel Levin being held by the arm by a confused deputy, Harlan Brooks's hand on his gun, frozen between the bench and the defendant, and Malik Thompson standing calmly at the table. "Everyone sit down." Caldwell's voice boomed, low and resonant. It wasn't a request. He strode down the central aisle, his hard-soled shoes clicking with sharp, angry precision on the marble floor. He didn't stop at the gallery rail. He unlatched the swinging gate and entered the bar, a space reserved only for counsel and court staff. He walked directly past the prosecution and defense tables, right up to the small podium where Malik Thompson stood. Hargrove watched, her mouth agape. "Reginald, what are you doing? That man is a defendant. He is in custody." Caldwell finally turned his head, pinning Judge Hargrove to her chair with a look of such concentrated fury that she physically recoiled. "You," he said to her, his voice quiet but carrying more menace than her loudest shout, "will be silent." He then turned to Malik Thompson, the anger melting from his face, replaced by an expression of profound, almost paternal apology. "Mr. Thompson," Judge Caldwell said, extending his hand, "I am so terribly sorry. There was a complete breakdown in communication. Your new ID badge hadn't been activated in the system. The security team at the front gate followed protocol for a warrant, but they were supposed to call my office, not detain you and send you here." Hargrove's brain stalled. "New ID badge? My office? What is he talking about?" "It's quite all right, Judge Caldwell," Malik said, his voice still preternaturally calm as he shook the presiding judge's hand. "It's been illuminating. I'll just bet it has." Caldwell turned to the stunned bailiff. "Deputy Brooks, release Miss Levin, and for God's sake, man, take your hand off your weapon." Brooks, blushing crimson, immediately unhooked his thumb and stepped back. "Yes, Judge." Rachel Levin stumbled forward, rubbing her arm, looking utterly bewildered. "Judge Caldwell," Hargrove tried again, her voice now high and thin. "I don't understand. This man has a warrant. He was disrespectful. He lied about being an officer of the court." Judge Caldwell turned his full body to face the bench. He looked up at Beatrice Hargrove, his face etched with a disappointment so deep it was terrifying. "He didn't lie, Beatrice." Caldwell's voice filled the cavernous room. "This man," he said, gesturing to Malik, "is Malik James Thompson. He is a graduate of Yale Law School. He is a former U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York. He is the man who successfully prosecuted the entire Petrova organized crime family, a case you taught a seminar on last spring." A collective gasp sucked the air from the gallery. Rachel Levin's hand flew to her mouth. Theo Randall, the reporter, was already texting his editor. "Holy!" Hargrove's face went from pink to a chalky, mottled white. Her eyes darted from Caldwell to Malik, as if seeing him for the first time. The rumpled suit, the exhaustion. He hadn't been sleeping in his suit because he was homeless. He had been sleeping in it because he'd just gotten off a red-eye flight from D.C. "The warrant," Caldwell continued, his voice like a hammer striking an anvil, "was, as Miss Levin tried to tell you. A clerical error for a car he sold 3 years ago. A mistake he was coming here to clear up as a courtesy before his 10 a.m. meeting. Hargrove was shaking her head, a jerky movement. 10 a.m. meeting. With who? Judge Caldwell took a small, deliberate step closer to her bench. He looked up at her, his eyes cold. With me, Beatrice, and the rest of the judiciary. He let the silence hang for 3 long, agonizing seconds. Allow me, Judge Caldwell said, his voice ringing with formal, terrible clarity, to properly introduce you to your new colleague. Judge Hargrove, meet Chief Prosecutor Malik Thompson. He was unanimously approved by the Governor's Commission last month. As of 9 a.m. this morning, he is the head of the District Attorney's Office for this entire county. The office that argues every single case in your courtroom. The world stopped for Judge Beatrice Hargrove. The polished oak, the gleaming brass, the very air of her kingdom suddenly dissolved. The thug, the liar, the defendant she had just sentenced to jail was the new Chief Prosecutor. He was, in the intricate ecosystem of the courthouse, the single most powerful attorney in the building. He controlled the budget, the cases, and the lawyers who would stand before her every day. Her mind, a fortress of supreme confidence just moments before, shattered into 1,000 panicked pieces. No, it's not possible. He's... But the face of Judge Caldwell, rigid with anger, and the calm, steady gaze of Malik Thompson confirmed the impossible. She had just tried to jail her new chief prosecutor. She stammered, her hands gripping the side of her bench. She looked like a drowning woman searching for a piece of wreckage. I did not know. He didn't identify himself. He tried, Your Honor. Rachel Levin's voice, no longer pleading but sharp with vindication, cut through the silence. He told you he was an officer of the court, and you called him a liar. He tried to explain, and you told him to be silent. You wouldn't even look at his paperwork. Miss Levin is correct, Judge Caldwell affirmed. We have the transcript. He nodded to the court reporter, who was pale and staring straight ahead, her fingers frozen on her keys. Hargrove looked desperately at Malik. Mr. Prosecutor Thompson, this is a misunderstanding. A simple error. Malik Thompson had not moved. He had not smiled. He had not gloated. He simply stood, a pillar of stillness, and watched her implode. When he finally spoke, his voice wasn't loud, but it carried to every corner of the room. Your Honor, he said, the title now dripping with a terrible formal irony. I believe you were in the middle of sentencing me for contempt. This simple statement was the final blow. It was the sound of the trap springing. It highlighted the absurd, catastrophic scope of her error. She hadn't just been wrong. She had been tyrannically wrong. She had been so blinded by her own prejudice that she couldn't see the most important legal figure in the county standing 6 feet in front of her. Hargrove let out a small, strangled sound. Her eyes rolled back slightly, and she stumbled, catching herself on her high-backed chair before sinking into it. She was no longer a judge. She was a small, terrified old woman. Judge Caldwell stepped forward, taking full command. Judge Hargrove, he ordered, you will recess this court. Now. Hargrove fumbled for her gavel, her hand shaking so violently she could barely grasp it. She lifted it, but it was Malik Thompson she was staring at. Court is recessed, she whispered. She banged the gavel, not with a crack, but with a weak, defeated thud. She didn't walk to her chambers. She fled. She scrambled from her chair and disappeared through the side door, her black robes flapping behind her like the wings of a broken crow. The second the door slammed shut, the courtroom erupted. The gallery buzzed with 100 frantic whispers. Theo Randall was already on his feet, halfway up the aisle, dialing his editor. "Bailiff," Caldwell barked. "Clear this courtroom now. Everyone out." Brooks and the other deputies, energized by Caldwell's authority, began herding the stunned onlookers out. "Miss Levin," Caldwell said, his tone softening. "Mr. Randall, please wait in the hallway. I will speak with both of you in a moment. Miss Levin, you have my profound apologies, and my thanks. You showed admirable courage." Rachel Levin, still in shock, just nodded. Caldwell turned to the man of the hour. "Mr. Thompson, my chambers, please." 10 minutes later, they were in Judge Caldwell's palatial office, a room filled with leather-bound books and portraits of stern-faced men. Caldwell was pacing, his face still red with rage. "A disaster, Malik," Caldwell said, using his first name. "A complete 5-alarm procedural and ethical catastrophe. I knew Beatrice was traditional. I knew she was a hardliner. I had heard whispers. But this was clan meeting-level racism in the open." Malik Thompson was sitting in a leather armchair, finally sipping a cup of water a clerk had brought him. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a cold, familiar exhaustion. "Judge," Malik said, his voice quiet, "with all due respect, this isn't about me. I'm fine. I have a title. I have power. I have you." He leaned forward. "This is about the man who was before me and the woman who will be after me. What happens to the people who walk into that courtroom who look like me but aren't the new Chief Prosecutor? What happened to them at 9:15? What would have happened to me at 9:45 if you hadn't walked in?" He looked Caldwell in the eye. "She didn't just sentence me to 48 hours in jail, Judge. She sentenced a type. She was willing to destroy a man's life, get him fired, and give him a record over a parking ticket because he didn't look the way she thought he should look." Caldwell stopped pacing. He stared at Malik, the anger on his face hardening into something more resolute. He knew what Malik was saying was the absolute, unvarnished truth. The real crime hadn't been the insult to Malik Thompson, the new chief. The crime had been against the very concept of justice. "You are 100% correct," Caldwell said. He walked to his desk and picked up the phone. "Get me Carla Simmons at the Commission on Judicial Conduct," he said to his assistant. "Tell her it's an emergency, a code-red emergency." He hung up. "Beatrice Hargrove is not just getting a suspension, Malik. I'm going to make sure she never sits on a bench in this state again. Her reign is over today." The hard karma for Judge Beatrice Hargrove was not a single swift execution. It was a slow, meticulous, and public dismantling. It was death by 1,000 procedural cuts, each one delivered with the cold precision of the law she claimed to uphold. It began that afternoon. By 3 p.m., Judge Reginald Caldwell had filed a 12-page formal complaint with the State Commission on Judicial Conduct, JCCC. By 3:05 p.m., Judge Hargrove was served with a notice of immediate suspension with pay pending a full investigation. She was ordered to surrender her keys, her courthouse ID, and her caseload. She was escorted from the building by the very marshals she used to command. But the real damage had been done by Theo Randall, the reporter. His story, published on the Kings County Chronicle website by lunchtime, was a nuclear explosion. Headline: Judge Hargrove sentences new Chief Prosecutor to jail for a parking ticket. Sources allege pattern of extreme bias. The story was brutal. It had quotes. It had the docket number. It had Rachel Levin's statement given from the hallway. "I tried to tell her. She wouldn't listen. She called him a liar. She called me a liar. This wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. The story went national by nightfall. The cable news networks picked it up. Photos of the stern-faced, silver-haired Hargrove were juxtaposed with the strong professional photos of Malik Thompson. The narrative was inescapable. Old racist power versus new progressive justice. Hargrove, humiliated and terrified, hired a high-priced defense attorney, a notorious shark named Garrett Sloan. Sloan immediately went on the offensive, releasing a statement that Judge Hargrove deeply regretted the administrative error, but that she had been dealing with a difficult and disruptive defendant who refused to identify himself. This was a fatal mistake. The very next day, Judge Caldwell, in his capacity as presiding judge, authorized the release of the official court transcript and the low-quality black-and-white security footage from the courtroom. The transcript was damning. "Mr. Thompson, Your Honor, I am an officer of the court. I was just trying to—" "Judge Hargrove, you are not an officer of the court. You are a defendant. How dare you impersonate a lawyer?" The video was worse. It didn't have clear audio, but the body language was unmistakable. Hargrove's furious, dismissive gestures, Rachel Levin's desperate pleading, Malik Thompson's impossible calm, and finally, Hargrove's pointing finger as she ordered him to jail. The JCCC, facing immense public and political pressure, fast-tracked the hearing. Malik Thompson, now installed in the Chief Prosecutor's office, was the first witness. He did not come in guns blazing. He was somber, precise, and devastating. "It was not her anger that concerned me," he stated under oath. "It was her certainty. She didn't check a file. She didn't ask a question. She knew what I was. In her mind, the facts were irrelevant. My failure to appear was not a clerical error. It was a character flaw inherent to my appearance. She saw a black man in a rumpled suit, and her entire judicial process was dictated by that single prejudiced assumption." The next witness was Rachel Levin. She came with receipts. "We, the public defenders, we call her the merciless or 32nd Beatrice, because that's how long a non-white defendant gets before she makes up her mind." Levin's testimony, guided by the JCCC's counsel, was the true beginning of the end. She presented case files. Case 44, C. People v. Rodriguez, a Hispanic man, 19 years old, shoplifting a $40 video game. First offense, the standard is probation and community service. Judge Hargrove gave him 90 days in county jail. That same afternoon, Case 44D, People v. Stewart, a white college student, 20 years old, shoplifting a $200 textbook. First offense, Judge Hargrove told him to not disappoint his parents again and dismiss the case. She presented 12 such cases, all from the last 6 months. The pattern was undeniable. The final witness was the bailiff, Harlan Brooks. He was terrified, sweating in his dress uniform. "Mr. Brooks," the JCCC counsel asked, "did you at any point try to warn Judge Hargrove?" Brooks looked at Hargrove, who was sitting beside her lawyer, looking gray and frail. "Yes, sir," Brooks said, his voice thick. I recognized Mr. Thompson. Not right away, but it clicked from the internal memos about the new DA. I tried to approach the bench. She slapped my hand away. She told me to handle the defendant. She has a look. We all know it. When she gets that look, you don't argue. I've seen her ruin careers. I was afraid. Afraid of what, Mr. Brooks? Of her, he said simply. We all were. The case of Judge Beatrice Hargrove, JCCC docket DVER 2204, was not a quiet internal review. It was a 2-week public spectacle. The hearing room, normally a drab bureaucratic space, was overflowing. Every seat was taken by reporters, courthouse staff, lawyers, and citizens who had for years whispered about Hargrove's cruelty, and now came to see the Queen held to account. Beatrice Hargrove sat at the respondents' table, a ghost of her former self. The severe bun was gone, replaced by limp, thinning silver hair. She wore a simple gray suit, her hands clasped so tightly on the table that her knuckles were white. Beside her sat Garrett Sloane, her attorney. He was everything she was not, vibrant, aggressive, and utterly without shame. He was a notorious shark, a man who specialized in defending the indefensible, and he seemed to relish the challenge. "This is not a hearing. It's a witch hunt," he declared in his opening statement, his voice booming. "It is a public lynching fueled by a media mob and a woke agenda, all aimed at destroying the career of a woman who has given 50 years of her life to the law." Sloane's strategy was one of scorched earth. He did not defend Hargrove's actions. He attacked the character of everyone who dared to report them. His cross-examination of Rachel Levin was brutal. "Miss Levin," he sneered, "isn't it true you're a social justice advocate? Isn't it true you've been disciplined twice for overly zealous advocacy in Judge Hargrove's courtroom? Isn't this just your personal vendetta? A way to get back at a judge who simply didn't buy your client's sob stories?" Rachel held her ground. "I was disciplined for filing motions to reconsider, Mr. Sloane, and I'll file them again every time I see a 19-year-old sent to jail for a first offense candy bar." His attack on Harlan Brooks, the bailiff, was just as vicious. "You were afraid," Sloane mocked. "You, a sworn deputy with a firearm on your hip, were afraid of a 70-year-old woman. Or isn't it true, Mr. Brooks, that you simply failed in your duty? That you saw a tense situation, and rather than de-escalate, you panicked? You're blaming her for your own incompetence." Brooks, sweating in the hot seat, simply shook his head. "I wasn't afraid of her. I was afraid of her power. There's a difference." But Sloane saved his most potent venom for the man who wasn't there, Malik Thompson, who had already given his calm, devastating testimony on day one. "Mr. Thompson is the new Chief Prosecutor," Sloane argued in his closing, pacing before the commission. "He is, by definition, the most powerful lawyer in the county. Are we to believe he was a helpless victim? He never said, 'Judge, I am the new Chief Prosecutor, Malik Thompson.' He played a game. He was coy. He said, 'I am an officer of the court.' A vague, almost tricky phrase. Why? Why would he do that unless he wanted this confrontation? He set a trap. He wanted to make an example of her. He wanted to humiliate this old-school judge to clear the way for his new regime. It was a bold, conspiratorial narrative, and it backfired spectacularly. The JCCC's lead counsel, Sophia Ramirez, a sharp, precise woman whose quiet demeanor concealed a steel trap of a mind, rose for her rebuttal. She walked to the lectern, not with Sloane's theatricality, but with a heavy file in her hands. "Mr. Sloane's defense is fascinating," she began, her voice calm. "He has painted Rachel Levin as a radical, Harlan Brooks as a coward, and the most powerful prosecutor in the state as a tricky victim. His entire argument is that the problem isn't Judge Hargrove's documented proven bias, but that her victims were not polite enough in the face of it. He is, to be blunt, blaming the victims of the bias for the bias itself. It is frankly disgusting." She then turned to the file. "But Mr. Sloane is right about one thing. This case is not just about Malik Thompson. He was just the man who had the power to turn on the lights. Let's talk about what was happening in the dark." This was the moment she produced the report from Dr. Singh, the statistician. Mr. Sloane calls Judge Hargrove tough and old school. The data calls her a bigot. She projected the numbers onto a screen. We analyzed 5 years of sentencing data. Judge Hargrove's sentencing for non-violent misdemeanor infractions for minority defendants is on average 350% higher than the district average. 350%. That isn't tough. That's a mathematical certainty of prejudice. A low gasp came from the gallery. One of the commissioners, a stern-faced former appellate judge, slowly removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Let's talk about the charge she levied against Mr. Thompson," Ramirez continued. "Contempt of court, a tool meant to preserve the dignity of the room. In Judge Hargrove's hands, it was a weapon. Her contempt of court charges, the ones she issues from the bench, are levied against non-white individuals at a rate of 9-1. She let the number hang in the air. This is not tough. This is a system of abuse. This is a judge who has for at least a decade run her courtroom as a personal fiefdom, where the color of your skin determines the weight of her gavel." Ramirez looked directly at the 7 commissioners. The Thompson incident was not an aberration. It was the culmination. It was not a mistake. It was a pattern. The only difference between Malik Thompson and the hundreds of others who stood before her is that he had a title. He was the one she couldn't break. He was the day she finally got caught. The commission deliberated for 3 agonizingly long days. On the final day, the room was silent. Judge Beatrice Hargrove was ordered to appear. She walked in, leaning on her lawyer's arm, and stood before the panel. She looked frail, shrunken, her eyes darting nervously around the room she once would have commanded. The JCCC chairman, a retired state Supreme Court justice named Harlan Whitaker, a man known for his profound, almost mournful solemnity, put on his reading glasses. He did not look at her. He read from the document in his hands. "This commission has investigated the events of that day, as well as the comprehensive judicial record of Judge Beatrice Hargrove." His voice was a deep, resonant bass that filled every corner of the room. "We have found a pattern of behavior that is not just alarming. It is shocking. Judge Hargrove has wielded her immense power, not as a scalpel for justice, but as a hammer of personal, deeply rooted prejudice." He finally looked up, his eyes peering over his glasses, and for the first time he addressed her directly. "Your actions on that day, madam, were not a mistake, as your counsel has argued. They were the predictable, inevitable product of a bias that you have allowed to fester and guide your hand for years. You failed to see a man. You failed to see a lawyer. You failed to uphold your most sacred, fundamental, and simple duty, to be impartial." He paused. "You saw only color, and you acted on that prejudice with the full, terrifying power of the state." Hargrove let out a small, choked sob. Sloane put a hand on her back, but it was a useless gesture. "Therefore," the chairman continued, "it is the unanimous decision of this commission, based on the overwhelming weight of the evidence and the testimony of Dr. Singh, Miss Levin, Mr. Brooks, and Mr. Thompson, that Judge Beatrice Hargrove be permanently removed from the bench of the Kings County Superior Court, effective immediately." The words hit like a physical blow. Permanent removal, the end of everything. But the chairman wasn't finished. "Furthermore, she is hereby barred from holding any judicial or state-appointed office for life. Her name will be stricken from the bar of this state." Another blow. She couldn't even practice law. "And finally," he said, his voice dropping, "as per the state's judicial malfeasance clause, which is invoked in cases of gross negligence and willful misconduct, all state-funded pension and retirement benefits are forfeited." This was the end. It was a professional death sentence, a financial execution, a total and complete nullification of her entire life. Hargrove's legs buckled. She didn't just cry. She collapsed, slumping against Garrett Sloane, who had to physically hold her up. The sound she made was a raw animal wail of despair. The hard karma was absolute. She lost her title. She lost her power. She lost her reputation. She lost her future. The Hargrove name, once a source of judicial royalty in the county, was now a permanent stain, a synonym for disgrace, a footnote in law school textbooks on how not to be a judge. The merciless of Courtroom 3B had been, in the end, mercilessly dealt with by the very system she thought she owned. 1 month later, Courtroom 3B was a different world. It was no longer a kingdom of cold shadows. It was just a room. The first thing Malik Thompson had requested upon taking office, a request Judge Caldwell had gleefully signed off on, was the removal of the heavy, moth-eaten velvet curtains that had suffocated the windows for decades. Now, bright, unfiltered November light flooded the space, revealing dust motes dancing in the air and the scuffs on the floor that Hargrove's perpetual twilight had once concealed. The room felt different. The oppressive metallic tang of fear was gone, replaced by a nervous, chaotic energy. The high, intimidating bench sat empty, a relic. The new presiding judge for this department, a sharp, energetic woman named Judge Elena Vargas, had opted to use a simple lower desk set up on the main floor closer to the council tables. Today, the room was being used for arraignments, and the atmosphere was almost conversational. Public defenders who used to stand rigid with dread now argued motions with vigor. Young assistant district attorneys hired by Malik's new administration were present, their binders filled with new directives on bail reform and diversion programs. The old guard ADAs, the ones who had thrived under Hargrove's tough-on-crime regime, looked visibly uncomfortable, like men forced to wear ill-fitting suits. But the most profound change was not in any single courtroom. It was happening 3 floors up in the Chief Prosecutor's office, and it was about to radiate through the entire building. Malik Thompson stood at a podium in the courthouse press room. The room was packed, a sea of cameras and microphones. In the front row, Theo Randall, the reporter who had broken the story, held his pen at the ready. In the back, standing against the wall, was Rachel Levin. She wasn't here by accident. Malik had personally invited her. Malik's suit was immaculate. His tie was perfect. His face, however, was not one of triumph. It was the face of a man about to begin a marathon. His voice was steady as he addressed the room. "Good morning," he began. "1 month ago, on my first day in this building, I had an illustrative experience. I was not here as a prosecutor. I was here as a defendant. And I witnessed from that unique vantage point a complete and total breakdown of justice." A low murmur rippled through the press corps. "It was a personal experience," he continued. "But I have learned in the past 30 days that it was not a unique one. For far too long, justice in Kings County has been a matter of luck. It has depended on the mood of a judge, the color of your skin, the quality of your suit, or the name on your ID badge. It cannot depend on whether the defendant happens to be the new DA. Justice must be a guarantee." He paused, letting the words sink in. He looked directly into the main camera, his gaze unblinking. "My predecessor's office was, by all accounts, focused on one thing: convictions. High conviction rates, tough sentences. That is a simple and ultimately a hollow metric for success. It says nothing of fairness. It says nothing of righteousness. It says nothing of justice. An office that pursues victory at the expense of justice is not a prosecutor's office. It is an instrument of oppression." He gestured to a newly printed sign behind him. "That is why today I am formally announcing the formation of the Kings County Conviction Integrity Unit." A shockwave, palpable and audible, went through the room. This wasn't just a new policy. This was a revolution. Reporters were already texting their editors. A Conviction Integrity Unit, CIU, was a declaration of war on the old way of doing things. It was an admission that the system had been wrong. "The CIU," Malik said, his voice rising in command, "will be an independent division within this office. Its sole purpose will be to investigate and remedy past wrongful convictions and instances of clear systemic injustice. And its first task, its first order of business, will be a comprehensive top-to-bottom review of every felony conviction and every summary contempt ruling issued by former Judge Beatrice Hargrove for the last 10 years. The room erupted, shouted questions, the flash of cameras, the scrambling of feet. This was it. This was the karma. It wasn't just that Hargrove was gone. He was digging up the roots of her entire toxic legacy. Malik held up a hand. "I will take questions in a moment. But let me be clear. This is not a witch hunt. This is a search for facts. This is about finding every person who was sentenced not on evidence, but on bias. It's about finding every People versus Rodriguez, a case you'll soon learn about, where a 19-year-old was jailed for 90 days for a first offense while a white student on the same day had his case dismissed for the same crime." He then looked to the back of the room, finding Rachel Levine in the crowd. "And we will not be doing this alone. This review will be conducted in full partnership with the Kings County Public Defender's Office." He nodded to Rachel. "Miss Levine, who so courageously stood for her client a month ago, has agreed to co-chair the review panel. This office will no longer view the public defenders as adversaries, but as partners in the pursuit of a just outcome." Rachel Levin, stunned, could only nod, a small, weary but profoundly grateful smile on her face. Theo Randall looked from Malik to Rachel and back, scribbling furiously. He understood. This wasn't just a press conference. It was the signing of a new constitution for Kings County. The hard karma, Theo realized, wasn't just the removal. It wasn't the lost pension. It wasn't the humiliation. This was the hard karma. It was the methodical, public, and righteous erasure of her work. It was the unwinding of her every cruel decision. It was the ultimate pronouncement that her entire career had been a failure, a stain to be scrubbed clean. Later that evening, the courthouse was quiet. The press was gone. The buzzing energy of the day had settled. Malik Thompson walked down the main hall of the second-floor gallery, his footsteps the only sound on the marble. He passed the grand oil-painted portraits of the courthouse's former presiding judges, a long line of stern, pale-faced men. He stopped. He was standing in front of a blank space on the wall. It was where Beatrice Hargrove's portrait had hung. By order of the JCCC, it had been removed, crated, and sent to her lawyer's office. All that remained was a faint, dusty rectangle on the flocked wallpaper and a single naked brass hook. Malik stared at the empty space. He felt no triumph. He felt no joy. He felt no satisfaction. He felt only the immense, crushing weight of the work ahead. He thought of the hundreds, maybe thousands, of files the CIU would have to read, the lives that were broken, the families that were shattered, the years that were stolen. All by the woman whose likeness had hung right here. The empty space wasn't a victory. It was an indictment. "Mr. Thompson, sir." Malik turned. It was Harlan Brooks, the bailiff, finishing his rounds. He held his hat in his hands, his gaze respectful and slightly awestruck. "Harlan," Malik replied, his voice quiet. Brooks nodded toward the empty space on the wall. Good riddance, if you ask me. Some of the old-timers are grumbling, but not me. Not the ones who had to, stand there and watch. He then looked at Malik, his expression earnest. What you're doing, sir, with the new unit, reviewing her cases. He swallowed, his throat working. It's good, sir. It's right. It's the rightest thing I've seen happen in this building in 20 years. Malik looked from the bailiff back to the empty wall. He thought of the man he was, just a month ago, standing in his rumpled suit, being sentenced to jail. He thought of the fear and resignation he had seen in the eyes of the other defendants in the holding cell. It's just the start, Harlan, Malik said. He straightened his tie, the simple motion a reaffirmation of his new role. It's a long way to go. He left the bailiff standing there. He turned his back on the empty, dusty rectangle and walked toward his office at the end of the hall. His footsteps were firm and measured, echoing in the grand, silent space, the sound of a new kind of authority in the Kings County Courthouse. Not the brittle, cruel authority of judgment, but the heavy, enduring authority of justice. This story is a stark reminder that the worst prejudices can hide behind the most powerful symbols, a judge's robe, a position of authority. Judge Hargrove thought her power made her untouchable, but she forgot one crucial thing. The truth always has a way of coming to light. And when it did, the karma that hit her wasn't just swift, it was total. She didn't just lose her job, she lost her entire legacy, which is now being dismantled as a monument to her own bigotry. What did you think of Judge Hargrove's outrageous abuse of power? What was the most satisfying moment of her downfall? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you believe that justice should be blind and that no one, no matter how powerful, is above the law, then like this video and share it with anyone who needs to see karma in action. And if you love stories where arrogance and prejudice get the ending they deserve, make sure you subscribe to our channel and ring that bell. We have new stories coming for you every